Hello and welcome back to our podcast. For those of you that are very loyal subscribers and have been hanging on by bated breath, waiting for this to come back, we appreciate that, both of you. And we're just glad you're here. Lots has been going on over the last little bit with both Michael and myself, and so it's taken us a little while to get back here. Hopefully we can be better about getting into a routine, but we're just glad you're here, and we're still having fun talking about different things. So it is a special Thanksgiving version of the podcast filled with gluttony and good food. So Michael, how's the tummy this morning down in Somerset?
Fat and happy. Everybody's fat and happy down here. I couldn't think of a better place to be on the morning after. Just kind of let it all settle in and have a little Bible discussion this morning.
Absolutely. So we have been here. So it's been a while, so we should probably catch some people up and let them know what we're doing here. So what we've been doing is looking at this idea of God's men at work, or God's people at work. And what we're trying to do is to take various Bible lessons, various Bible characters, and try to understand their story in their life, but through the lens of what are some business tips that we can take from that. Our disclaimer that we always give is the most important part of any scriptural message is the spiritual message. Please never misunderstand that. We touch on that a lot through this, but we're taking a secondary lesson that's there, and that's just some business principles. These people were sometimes very successful business people. Sometimes we're very terrible business people. So we've just tried to learn their lessons and said, how can we apply that to make us better? Because when you belong to God, you don't just belong to him in a church building or at your house. You belong to him wherever you're at. And that means in business as well. So we want to try to take those principles and make us better stewards of the possessions that God has entrusted us to. And so with that being said, that's kind of what we're trying to accomplish. Michael, where are we going to try to do that today?
So we're gonna go to Luke chapter 5, and our subject matter this morning is the apostles themselves. And we probably don't think of the apostles as business people, and rightfully so. I mean, that's obviously not the most important context that we're given of their lives in Scripture, but we are given these glimpses into what they did. And remember that these guys had to earn a living also. And in Luke chapter 5, we're given this kind of fascinating insight into some of the apostles and what their careers, what their vocations look like. And I'm not telling anybody anything they don't know here, but we got Peter and Andrew, James and John. They were fishermen, and it was pretty clear from other places in Scripture that they had a kind of a joint venture. They worked together in their fishing venture, and this is how they supported themselves. This is how they fed their families. We know Peter had a wife, and we're not given as much detail on the other apostles, but we can reasonably assume they had some families to take care of, and this was their vocation. And the lesson that we learn in Luke chapter 5, I think I've misapplied this passage in the past, certainly. But I want to look at what Jesus does for the disciples in Luke chapter 5, and really take the example of what can we learn about how the apostles, how these four men treated this really unique incident in their business lives, and what are the applications that we can take from it. So, Mike, if you allow me, I'll kind of put the context together here. In Luke chapter 5, we're early in the Gospels, and the apostles have been around Jesus. We know all the way back. Some of these men were apostles of John the Baptist, and then John pointed them to Jesus, and so they have seen some of the things that Jesus has done. Some of the miracles and some of his teaching, but they are not what we would call full-time apostles. They have been following Christ and learning from his teaching, but they've been going back to their day jobs. So we get into this example and get to this passage in Luke chapter 5. And these men are fishing on the Sea of Galilee. And we know that in verse 3, one of the boats is Simon's. He puts out a little bit from land, and we know that they fished all night. And Jesus tells him early in the morning, put out your nets. And Peter said, "Hey, this ain't a hobby. We've been at this all night professionally. We haven't caught anything." I can imagine that comment would have almost been a little bit offensive.
Bitter.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is my profession, Jesus. Like I've been at this all night. It's not because I haven't been trying.
And think about too where we're at with their understanding of Jesus, right? We're very early on, and it's like, sit down over there, kid. You're a carpenter's son, right? Just leave the fishing to the professionals. We know what we're doing. We've been doing this all night.
Yeah, I'm not telling you how to make a cabinet, Jesus. I don't appreciate you telling me how to fish. And yet he said they had enough respect for Jesus that Peter said, "At your word, I'll put out my nets." And so I'm going to begin reading in verse 6 and read a couple of verses here. "And when they had done this, they enclosed such a large number of fish that their nets were breaking. And they signaled to their partners in the other boat," talking James and John, "and they filled both boats so that they began to sink. And when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, 'Depart from me, because I'm a sinful man, O Lord.' For he and who were with him were astonished at the fish that they had caught." And so James and John, sons of Zebedee, partners of Peter, were there. And Jesus said to Peter, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be catching men." And when they brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. And I have heard that comment at the end of verse 11, and I've used that comment at the end of verse 11. They left everything and followed him, and use that as what a profound display of faith that these men, they left their professions, they left their possessions, and they just left it all and went with Jesus. And wasn't it a remarkable act of faith that they knew that Jesus would take care of them, and they were willing to walk away from the life that they previously knew? I think in that analysis, what I have missed is what did Jesus provide for them in that moment? And so, Mike, I'll turn it over to you at that point. So what's critical about this miracle that Jesus provides for them?
Well, what I think is, again, you and I have talked about this a ton on this podcast, is that oftentimes what we do when we read the scripture, especially if we know anything about it, is we read to the punchline, right? So we're going to skip over a bunch of stuff and get to the punchline. And the punchline here is, and they left everything behind and went with Jesus, right? So, look at that faith. And I'm 100% guilty of this, preach the same lesson. These men left everything and took a vow of poverty and left Jesus. But, if you're careful, and especially if you're a nerd looking to do some math, you start thinking about, wait a minute, boys, you filled up 2 pretty good sized boats with fish, right? I'm just thinking about all the stuff that we just read, right? Not only did you fill the boats, but you filled the boats so much that they started to sink. Now, they didn't completely submerge the boats because they were able to get back, but you added so much weight to these boats that they started to sink. And I think part of what we miss too here is, I think sometimes we read that without understanding. We think they pulled back up on the beach with those boats overflowing with fish, and that's when they just walked off with Jesus. No. They dealt with the fish, right? So, and, dealt with them, processed them, unloaded, all of that stuff. So here's the question, Mike. And this is what, this is the part that makes this story so cool. What's 2 overloaded fishing vessels worth?
And fortunately for us, that we can we can have some educated assumption of that without just me and you conjecturing on it, right? What do we know
Right.
about fish that's required to submerge first century Palestinian fishing vessels? My knowledge of that would be pretty shallow. So
We
there,
would guess though.
yeah, oh, for sure. I mean, we should, yeah, we would. So we stumbled across this pretty remarkable piece of academic literature. And like many academic papers, it's titled horribly. I wish they would let you and I take a swing at titling it. But the title of the paper is An Estimate of the Value of Two Boatloads of Fish is recorded in Luke 5, 1 through 11, which is pretty descriptive, just not very imaginative as titles go. And so give the background to this a little bit. There's really interesting discovery, and not that long ago, a few decades ago, along the Sea of Galilee, when the Sea of Galilee had receded because of a drought, and the level of the lake, level of the sea had dropped pretty significantly. It unearthed this kind of preserved fishing vessel, and archaeologists and historians found and were able to unearth this entire boat and date it with some degree of accuracy. And it turns out that this is a boat that would have been from roughly the time of Jesus, the early first century AD. And so it is now on display. You can go look at this preserved vessel. It is at the Yigal Allon Museum in Israel, and it's kind of commonly referred to as the Jesus boat, because this is an example of the kind of vessel that would have been used for fishing in first century Palestine. And so these two, there's a couple of people names on this paper, Hauser and Hauser. They go through this really, really detailed analysis of, if we assume that this is the size boat that we are dealing with, and we reasonably assume the type of wood that would have been used to construct this vessel, we can pretty accurately determine its volume. We can pretty accurately determine its buoyancy, and we can pretty accurately determine how many pounds of fish it would take to sink this sucker. And that is a really, really interesting, turns out that that's an extraordinarily interesting calculation. And then if you know how much fish it takes to sink this sucker, you can, again, using some materials and historical literature of the day on the rough estimate of a value of a freshwater fish in Capernaum in the first century, you can get a ballpark estimate of the economic value of this miracle. Now, it almost seems crude to reduce this great miracle of Jesus to an economic value, but I think in this case there's a reason to do it. So I'll let you tackle it from there.
All right. So when we start looking at this, and again, here's where we get lost, right? So we assume these guys, hey, Jesus, you helped us catch some fish that we couldn't catch all overnight. And it was so many fish that we quit fishing, right? Isn't that kind of the way we've always read that? It was so many fish that we just quit fishing. We got sick of fish. It was so many fish and we quit fishing. Instead of, if we're honest with the text, if they processed said fish and that this was just their last day at work, then what was the economic value of that? And if there's an economic value of that split four ways, did these boys walk out on their job or did these boys retire? And I think that's a significant, that changes a few things, right? Because we learn as we read later in the New Testament, Peter helping his mother-in-law and some other things that go on, we find out that Peter's got some wealth, right? Indirectly, as we start reading this. And if you ever asked yourself that question, like, I wonder where, maybe Peter was just a really good fisherman before he met Jesus. No, Peter got paid today. And the wealth that we look at with Peter and those that he's able to support, I'm persuaded now after this economic data came from today. And Peter and Andrew and James and John, went into retirement to follow Jesus. They didn't take a vow of poverty to follow Jesus. They went into retirement to follow Jesus, and were able to do the things that, were necessary to do over the next few years. I think based on this, and I hate to, I don't know what other word to use for this, but it feels horrible to say that a miracle here like this, but they made out based on this score, right? You scored, you hit the mother load, and they were able to get away. And Michael, I'm missing it in the text here. I'm trying to find it, but what's the number? What's
Yeah,
the
so
dollar?
if you want to skip to the punchline, and by necessity, the clearly very intelligent people who did these calculations, it involves some estimation, right? We know the size of this vessel, at least the one they use as their comp boat, but there's a lot of room for error here. What kind of fish did they catch, and what's the value of that fish? And there's definitely a range. But if you want to look at what it would take to sink 2 boats and compare it to something that we could have, some frame of reference for, it's somewhere between 50 and 150 years of pay. To put that, and obviously that's a broad range, on a narrow a little bit, most likely between 75 and 100 years worth of wages. So split 4 ways. Yeah, split 4 ways, somewhere between 20 and 25 years of pay. So you want to, again, kind of do our best to put that into modern, something we can get our hands around. Average, take the average income of $50,000, I think, in the US, rough numbers, median income, 20 years wages would be $1 million. And so, again, think about, these are probably, I'm not saying these are subsistence level fishermen, but they're by no means wealthy. And each of them walk away from this incident in Luke chapter 5 as millionaires. And so to me, that reframes not only verse 11, but a lot of the rest of what I think about the apostles in Jesus' ministry. Is certainly it required faith to follow this homeless rabbi. I mean, it doesn't necessarily diminish that faith, but it does change that decision. It would have been wasteful and foolish for them to leave these fish rotting on the beach. I think we both agree that they would have taken advantage economically of this, and that Jesus gave them the ability to, being a good steward, to be, while taking care of their families. Jesus gave them the ability to walk away. I think that's what's remarkable.
And here's the thing that I think. So how do we take this story and start to apply it to us? So here are things that start to come to mind with that is, they could have very easily put this money in the bank from this big score and tried to build bigger barns, right? Hey, here's, we had a huge sale, but this was probably a one-time thing. We'll put that away to the side. But, if we keep working and made what we made every other day on top of this plus interest, I mean, we could probably double this in 5 years, right? I mean, isn't that oftentimes the way we think, that if we hit a number and then that number, we think about how we can grow same said number, right? And we've had this conversation here before multiple times on the podcast about the difference between being, optimistic or wanting to grow and being greedy, right? That's, that's a rub, I think, that we all have to have a conversation about and come to a point in our own mind and our own lives about, am I trying to grow for the sake of growing, to grow, to help other people, to help my employees and all of those things, or am I being greedy? Well, I think the crossroads these boys hit here is, do we keep working and try to double down, or do now we have the economic ability to go into retirement and work in the kingdom? And there's a lot when we talk about this retirement question that I think are really hard questions and hard answers, right? Because there are some people that have worked their whole lives, for XYZ company. And then when they retire there, they want to spend their time, on the lake or fishing or whatever, and want to retire from working the kingdom too, right? Like, well, I taught Bible class once a quarter when I was working, but now I'm retired from work and I don't want to teach Bible class either. I kind of want to be free from all that. These guys said, we can retire to do more work in the kingdom, right? And so if God has blessed us with the talents and skills and abilities to make a living up to the point that we're able to retire, and we're all blessed at different levels, right? Some of us may be able to retire at 50, others of us may have to work till we're 75. But at whatever point we're able to retire, in my mind, this lesson is about when you can retire, now you got to work in the kingdom. Because now you don't have the responsibilities of work. You can use that same energy and effort that God lets you bless some other company with in the kingdom.
Yeah, it's remarkable when you think about it in that context. Is how did the apostles spend their retirement years? They spent them tired and cold and persecuted on behalf of Jesus. That's how they spent their retirement, because their job was fishermen, and they were able to leave that. They were able to leave that profession because they had an exceptionally good run as fishermen, and so they were able to retire from fishing. And then they spent their retirement being uncomfortable and traveling all across the world, and ultimately dying. At least 3 of these 4 guys that we know of from history, ultimately dying because of their allegiance to Jesus. Like that's pretty.
Still fishing, using different bait, catching different things, right?
Yes. And that's exactly what Jesus said, right? That's what he said to Peter. From now on, you'll be catching men. But I do think, Jesus did not leave them. He didn't ask them to let their family starve. He didn't ask them to leave their loved ones in a bad position. Jesus knew that, we think about these first century people, like they wouldn't have had any idea about investment or
right.
interest, and Jesus is the one that taught the parable about, should you not have put my money with the bankers and gathered interest. I mean, those concepts were understood. Jesus and these apostles would have known that, this money can be used. We can use the interest off this money to sustain our family. I mean, would have been well known that you're taken care of.
Yeah. So the quick math from the retirement guy is, if you have 25 years worth of income and you can draw 4% off of that, you can draw that amount every year without touching your principal, right? Just simple math.
And so, yeah, somebody in first century Palestine knew that math too. And so, again, we don't come at that flippantly. These people were able to walk away with a clear conscience and about the way their families were going to be treated, is what I'm saying there. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, do we have enough faith to do the same? And that's a really, really hard question, is because, the social scientists will tell you that we are wired in such a way that there is no number that's enough for us to feel comfortable with. we don't get to a number and say, no, I'm good now, that's enough. That is not the way that we are. It's not the way that especially Americans are typically wired. And so, when is the point, like these apostles, when we can say, look what Jesus has done. I am richly blessed. Look what Jesus has done. Now, the best way for me to be a steward in God's kingdom, the best way for me to be helpful to Jesus right now, is to leave this profession and start focusing all of my time on working for him. Man, that is a phenomenal choice.
Yeah, and think about it. We know a few of these people, right? In our lives that have sold a business and then dumped everything into work in the kingdom. And it's not always, and I think, that's where we get lost a little bit too, is sometimes people think, well, if I get to retirement, I'm not a preacher, so I can't preach. That's, you don't have to. We've got some friends that we love a bunch that, started a 501c3 to help babies, right? There's people that are, doing different things to be helpful because they've been blessed, right? And so when we think about that, most people, so I do retirement planning for a living, as most of you know, and there's usually a number we're trying to get to. And that number typically is how much income do you need based on your budget? So whatever that number is, we sit down and do a budget, usually with people in their, 40s and 50s, and say, all right, when I can draw, X dollars off of my portfolio, then I can retire. So if that number is 59 and a half, 62, 65, 70, whatever that number is, we look and see when those lines cross. But what I've learned in the last 20 years of doing this is that retirement is as much psychological as it is financial, because I've had all kinds of clients that have retired and gotten bored and don't know what to do with themselves, because you've been working 40, 50, 60 hours a week since you were 15 or 16 years old. And now you're retired, and it sounds great that I'm going to sit on the back porch and, not do anything. You can do that for a week, but then after that, you got to figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to continue to find purpose for yourself. So now you let's kind of go back, putting that in context is, what if the purpose is I'm trying to get to a number so that I can be more effective in the kingdom? That if I can get here, now I can be an elder. Now I can, go help people on, various evangelistic trips overseas, or I can start, manage, maintain, a group, because at our congregation, we've got a half a dozen widows, and somebody needs to just keep their eyes on them and make sure they're taken care of. So whatever that is that we're good at, I assure you there's a need for it in the kingdom, right? It's just, we got to figure that out and that be part of retirement. But too often what happens is we're tired. That's why we retire. Tire's in the middle of that, right? We retire and it's like, I don't want to do anything anymore. I've had, unfortunately, multiple people I've talked to that, hey, why don't you teach Bible class anymore? Well, when I retired from work, I don't want to teach anymore. But now you have more time, right? You should have more energy. You should have more ability to do that because the Lord's blessed you and put you in a position to be able to retire. But yet I'm retiring from the public service and I'm retiring from the kingdom so that I can just focus on me. And I think that, again, is a misuse of what Jesus does for us, right? If we're being blessed, we talk about that all the time right here, that to be that funnel, like I've been blessed, God's really taking care of me. So how can I use that to take care of other people? And the greatest gift that we can be given is time, right? I don't have to punch a time clock anymore. I don't have to go to the office anymore. I've got all this time to be able to use for good in the kingdom. Shouldn't my focus be on that? I think that's the biggest lesson here, is that what do we do when we get to the point where we've got time to work in the kingdom? Why aren't we appreciating that blessing enough?
Yeah, and I think that it really goes back to something that we've talked about a few times as we've done these podcasts, and that is, what is our primary identity? If our primary identity is what profession we have and what we're doing economically, we have to continue to work because that's who we are. That's our identity. And when we lose, if we're forced to step away from that, we kind of feel like we've lost who we are. And if our identity is, well, the first thing I am is I'm a Christian. The first thing I am is I'm a disciple. And then our whole worldview is, with where I am right now, what's the best thing I can do for Jesus? If that's our worldview, then when that moment comes, I think it just reframes that whole question. If our whole lives are about what can I best do for Jesus, how can I best be a steward of the things I have for the kingdom, Well, then when this windfall happens, it changes our reaction to that. And it's exactly what it did for the apostles, is because they had begun to form this identity as, I do understand that the first thing I need to do is hang on to this Jesus character. When I'm able to do that with all of my time, why wouldn't I take advantage of that opportunity? And so, man, this account to me has become so powerful. It certainly was an act of faith to go follow Jesus. It was, but it was not an act of complete blind economic submission. We'll just see how we're going to make ends meet. Jesus did not ask them in this passage. He did not ask them to make that decision. It wasn't, we'll follow Jesus because we know he can provide. It was, we'll follow Jesus because he has provided. And that's a little different context for us as we put ourselves in there.
Yeah, I think it reads different if they retired to follow Jesus. I think it reads different. It feels different. So let me give a couple of goofy disclosures, disclaimers, like dispel some nonsense here, right? If you follow Jesus, you're not going to get wealthy. Let's stop that nonsense. There is, I'm sure, there are preachers in pulpits all over the country that have taken that academic paper and said, see, follow Jesus and you'll be wealthy. Well, Paul is the other answer to that, because Paul lost all of his stuff when he followed Jesus, right? Remember, Paul, very wealthy, from a prestigious family, followed the best teacher, graduated top of his class from Harvard equivalent. And Paul was penniless and broke because when he left being a Jew, of being a Pharisee of Pharisees, he lost all of that, right? So when we make a decision about Jesus, it's a spiritual decision. Like if you're making financial, health, and wealth decisions about Jesus, it's nonsense. So let's not take the wrong thing out of here. What I will tell you with absolute certainty is we will be provided for. To the level that we're provided for, I don't know. I mean, God provides to each of us a different level, a different measure. And even in our country, we talk about, the haves and the have-nots. Understand, being born here, you're already better than 62% of the world, right? You're not in a hut in the middle of a village somewhere in Africa. You are economically, even our lowest, economic class here in the United States is far above the majority of the world. So let's be clear when we talk about those blessings that we're not complaining with our mouth full about where we are and how we're getting along. You may not be able to afford, a 5-bedroom house with 3 cars, but you having a house and indoor plumbing has got you above a lot of other people, right? So we've got to kind of try to put that stuff in context. Secondly, it's still a decision that we've all got to make about where our effort and energy go. So I think we can maybe get our mind around being a good steward financially. This one's the one that keeps me up at night, Michael. I mean, this is it. Am I being a good steward of my intellectual capital, my energy, my time? The most valuable resource, the only thing that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and I have in common is the 24 hours. That's it. It's the only thing we know. But am I really being a good steward of that time, that resource, my energy, when I'm looking at what I'm trying to accomplish and what needs to be accomplished in the kingdom? And if I've got a resource that I've hit my retirement goal, and now Jesus has said, all right, I freed up some more of that time for you.
We're going to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, nothing is as easy in practice as it is when you got 2 eggheads talking about an academic paper. But I do think that, if you're listening, or if you're on this pod, if you're participating, it should give us some pause, and we should we should really wrestle with it. And it should be part of what goes into our decision about retirement and what does that mean, and what does a godly retirement of a disciple look like. And I think that's what I'm going to take away from this passage. Jesus provided so that the apostles could retire to him.
To work in the kingdom. Absolutely. Yeah. And so here's the thing. So from the financial planner guy in the room is, we should prepare for both retirements equally, right? So how do you prepare for retirement from work now? Well, you put money in 401ks, IRAs, you're putting money away for retirement, you're paying into Social Security, you're doing all of those things. But when you prepare to retire to the kingdom, what work should we be in preparing to be an elder or a deacon? Or what work should we be putting in to prepare to be, involved in some type of, outreach for benevolence or evangelism efforts? We can take those classes and start doing those things now to prepare ourselves that once we have the time to be able to do it full time, why not start building up the same way instead of, hey, I retired last week, let me find something to do in the kingdom. No, let's make deposits into the spiritual account as well to start getting ourselves ready. Because we need to be both financially and psychologically and spiritually ready whenever that day comes. And there's, we talk about, planning for the future and, what we're looking towards. Remember the guy that built the bigger barns, the problem wasn't the fact that he, was blessed and he was wealthy because they had a good bumper crop. The problem was he said, look at what I've done and look at what this is going to do for me. And he was, I'm trying to think of the exact line.
Not there. Rich toward God.
Not rich toward God. Thank you. Yeah. He's rich toward himself, but not rich toward God. Now, I think that parable ends differently if he says, hey, look, I'm going to tear down these barns. I'm going to build bigger barns so that we can help the benevolent issues in Judea. That parable ends very differently, right? So I think that's got to be part of this too, is in the blessings, how are we going to be rich toward God because of this?
Yeah.
That's the.
So my last word on this would be, I heard someone I really respect did a lesson one time about how many people in scripture, these kind of biographical accounts we have of these Bible characters, how many of them did not end well? How many people in the Bible didn't finish well? That they had faith, they did these things for God, and yet they didn't finish well. The end of their lives, they slowed down or turned their back on God, or even if it's not that dramatic, it's just clear that they lost their zeal. And so how do we finish well? And, as you noted, making those deposits into the spiritual account so that when the time comes, we can use the years that God blesses us with. If we are blessed to have retirement type years, how do we make sure we finish well? And that, I think, if like the apostles, Jesus gives us that opportunity, finishing well is a pretty lofty and ambitious spiritual target.
Absolutely. Yeah. Having the time to do the things necessary. Because, the other passage that as he, takes the apostles out and sends them out on, on both the limited and the extended commissions there is that the fields are ripe, harvesters are few. And, that's the other one that keeps me up is that, we're low on harvesters. And if we can be blessed enough to provide the economic value to become a harvester, because now our needs are supported, it's got to be something we think about and put some mind to. Like I said, it's kind of stuff that keeps me up at night when I think about this, that, hey, what are we doing to make sure we prepare both ways?
Yep.
And
Good one to wrestle with.
Yeah. And I think that's like most things. So that's for those of you that have been listening to the podcast for a while, most of the answers we give you are just more questions. It's kind of what we do around here, and wrestle with them. But as we've said, as you heard us say before, you're in good spiritual shape when you're having the wrestling match with yourself.
Yeah. Beware people who give you, beware the people that give you all the answers would be my comment.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you all again for tuning in with us. I think we've given you plenty to wrestle with today with those thoughts. I'll try to throw the link for that academic paper out there for the few nerds that would really love that. I know there's a few of you out there that are listening that would enjoy that as much as Michael and I did.
It's a good time.
It's a good time, but full disclosure, it's an academic paper. It's just those of you looking for a quick read, no, that's not what this is.
It's not a breezy read.
Cool stuff. But it's cool stuff. We'll try to post that with the link to the lesson for those of you that are interested, and we're gonna try to be better about getting more regular with this. But life gets in the way sometimes, and we get a little busy. But we're gonna try to be a little bit better for those of you that tuning in with us. But thank you. We appreciate you all a bunch, especially time of Thanksgiving. There's a lot to be thankful for, and we're thankful that you put up with our nonsense. And I'm thankful for my good partner in crime there in Somerset, and being able to bounce these ideas off of each other for going on close to 20 years now of trying to get better together.
Likewise. Enjoyed it, my friend.
All right. Thank you all.